Welcome to the April meeting. We have a nice program tonight on light pollution, theft of the light. I'm looking forward to that since we have our neighbor, Casad, which now is owned by a private, a landscape or a private company. But I've never seen so many trucks parked over there. There must be thousands of them waiting for their chips, the GM trucks parking lot over there on the other side of the fence. So a reminder that that the dues are due, and you can either go online and do PayPal, or if you go online and fill out the form, and you can send in your check to fill the treasurer. So we won't harbor on that. So anybody have any observing reports or something they want to share before we get to the program?
I got one.
Go ahead, Ed.
This is from, it'll be 2 weeks ago tomorrow. And why isn't this, where is it? Crap. It doesn't show up like it did last time. Heck, where is it? I'm sorry to waste everybody's time here. Something changed here. I was trying to share. Usually it comes up, says it allows me to do from, what's the whiteboard? No, desktop? No.
What was the subject, Ed?
It was Sun Halo. Post attendee, iPhone, iPad. Where am I at? Oh, files.
Well, while we're waiting, I published a Messier Marathon chart with the March eyepiece, and I understand that there were some people out at the observatory seeing how many they could get.
Gene, Ed and I went out there a week ago last Monday, and we had my 16-inch Dob and his light intensifier, and we saw about 30 in a row till we were finally exhausted and went home around 11:30.
Wow,
It's a pretty good night though.
that's great.
Yeah, in that marathon chart, there's a gap, observing gap, that occurs sometime around midnight, that you can go get a cup of coffee for an hour and then come back and continue on until dawn. I don't know many people who have done that.
We were not able to get the first 6 or 8 objects because
Yeah,
you need to get it in March, I think, and not April. It was just, we were able to see Orion and the stuff around Orion, but some of those other objects were already below the horizon.
And
Or yeah, in the west, even if they're low, Fort Wayne light kind of interferes.
yeah. Yeah, that sky glow dome to the west of the observatory.
Also last Friday, Ed and I did a Cub Scout deal where we showed them a number of objects before they drove us crazy, and we had to shut them down.
Oh, nice one, Ed.
Oh, there we go. Finally, sorry. If I can get the thing over. Okay. Yeah, this was 7:15 in the morning. Caught me by surprise. And so anyways, because it wasn't really all that cloudy, this is looking the other direction here. So this was the sky. So here's a contrail here, another contrail here. So just a little bit of haze, a little milkiness. So caught me by surprise. But anyway, one of the best ones I've seen as far as the total color saturation. So.
And you got the sun dogs.
Got the 2 sun dogs. I've never got the third one. You can get normally if a little later in the day. I think it's a little higher in the sky. I've never got a really early morning, but it just goes to show, when you keep looking up, I guess,
Yeah.
So,
good
but
job.
anyways, so yeah, stop share.
All right.
Thank you.
Well,
I've got a quick one if we got another second.
yeah, go ahead.
A month ago tonight, I got to have my granddaughters, two oldest granddaughters out on the driveway with the rest of our family and got to see the Lunar X.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
congratulations.
Just kind of a fun thing. I also photographed the McDonald's arch on the moon. Some of you saw my effort at that. So, which really isn't McDonald's, but this is just a cell phone camera, so it's fuzzy, but there's a little close up. So it was really fun showing that to my granddaughters.
That's very good.
Okay, I have a couple.
Go ahead, Joe.
I don't know if anybody's been watching space weather, but we yesterday or the day before, we had 4 sunspot groups on the sun. So
Yeah, I've been monitoring them with my solar projector, except for today.
looks like we're down to 3, but it's nice to see that we have complex sunspot groups. They had more than one spot. They're a little bit on the small side, but nice to see that there were so many. And 2 days ago, when I was out looking at them, I had some very nice prominences associated with them as well. So that was nice to see. Maybe the propagation will pick up a bit when we have a little bit more ultraviolet light from these sunspots hitting our atmosphere. So hopefully that continues. The other thing I have is a more detailed update on the spectroscope. If I can present that, Julie.
How long is it?
It's 3 slides.
Okay,
Couple minutes.
if the program, Tim Hunter, do you mind?
No, go ahead. I'm having a great time here.
All right, go ahead, Joe.
Do you see the scope, the LX600 on screen?
Yep.
Am I properly sharing? Good. Well, this is the spectrograph. Basically, it's the LX600 with this device here, the LH High-Res. I don't know if many people have seen this at the observatory, but this is our spectrograph, and we're making some fair progress, getting to the point where we're doing some good with it. So, just wanted to highlight some of the things that we've done. For some reason, there we go. So this is what we've done since I've got heavily involved in January. In the past couple of weeks, we've actually routinely started taking spectras with the mono camera, the H694 camera. So that's nice. You'll see some of those at the end. Initially, it looked like we had a lot of tracking issues, and it turns out that the Starlock optics needed to be cleaned. As soon as they were cleaned up, we started getting really spot-on tracking, at least spot-on tracking when the seeing conditions were right. And right is kind of a narrow window if you don't change the gains. So we'll experiment with those in the future, but we're really getting good tracking at this point. Other contributors to the problem that we were having were just routine things, balance. We touched up the polar alignment and leveled off the tripod, and the tracking has been good ever since. In addition, recently, as we've started to do more spectras, the go-to accuracy has come in to be a bit of a problem. And the main problem there is that there's 3 sensors in the LX600, and they haven't been adjusted since at least as far as I know, since the spectrograph was put on there. The spectrograph is simply too long to allow it to point at Polaris or true north. And in order to do that, we'd have to take it off. So hopefully we'll have some maintenance here coming up, and we can actually get good sensor alignments on those. There is a workaround. You just manually have to tell it to go someplace, and then manually slew it off, and then do a sync, and you can get pretty decent go-to accuracy there. We demonstrated that just a few days ago. Time, day, and location are being updated now with the GPS function. There's a GPS receiver in there, and it will download those 3 sets of parameters now. I've got it set up to download when you turn the power on. So the idea is to have the roof open when you turn the mount on, or just can turn it off and then turn it back on when the roof is open, and it will automatically update those all of those parameters. Another thing, we've had a laptop sitting around in the observatory for some time with a battery update and additional RAM in there. That's proven to be a really handy tool to have. When you're doing things like focusing or doing finder and scope alignment, it's nice just to be able to look at the screen right next to you and be able to turn the dials and get it tuned in just spot on while you're standing there. Very, very handy. So very glad we did that. Really early on, there was a lot of concern that the USB 2 hub didn't have the bandwidth to support two cameras and the control application that was on there. And I did an investigation of that and found that it does actually work quite well. We have been using all three applications with the H694 camera, and it's worked very nicely. So that's worked out, got that all worked out. The camera itself, the 694, there was some concerns that it really wasn't operating to specification, and investigated that, and that's actually working quite nicely too. So we're in good shape there. So a lot of the basic pieces are in place. So what else do we have to do? We found that we have to do a little bit of maintenance on the spectrograph itself. There's some adjustments and some cleaning that need to get done. So that's one of the next steps. The sensor alignments that I've already mentioned. The stars look a little bit wide, a little bit oblong, and so need to look into either collimating the telescope or investigating the impact that the Starlock has. There's something I found when I was reading up on cloudy nights, something that would, if the Starlock isn't adjusted properly, it will dither and cause you to see lines. So we may be seeing that. So just a couple more experiments on the tracking side will get us there. That's the next item. It kind of interacts with the one above it. There's a utility to monitor Starlock's operation, and it will give you hints on when you need to do the another polar alignment, and you can actually see what it's seeing. There's a way to get it to download the images that it has. So I think having that utility available to us would be really handy for the operation of the telescope. So once we get all that in hand, actually we don't even need the Starlock utility for that, but the next thing to do are projects so that we can figure out exactly how we should be using it. Last couple days ago when we were out, we were starting to do calibration spectras between each of the object spectras, so that we have a precise alignment of where we're at according to a standard, so we know what we're looking at. So things like that need to be just sort of noted down so that we have a regular process that we go through. And then for me anyway, be nice to know the how to use the RSpec software. So that's on my list of things to do. And then finally, some of the spectra we've been taking, you can see here. This raw lunar spectra was taken a couple nights ago. You can see the really fine structure in the spectra that we have. We're only using a 600 line per millimeter diffraction grating, which is not really ultra fine. We have gratings that go up to 1800. So I can't imagine what that would look like. But a low dispersion spectra is illustrated at the bottom here, and you can see that we have more fine-grained detail than this spectra, which comes out of the spectroscopic atlas. Also, the other night we took this Procyon spectra, and you can see the H beta absorption line here, in the book. You see that same line right here, and we have additional spectra that we took a few days before that using 2x2 binning. This one at the top here was 1x1, so you can see the difference that binning makes. Down here we have the original spectra of the neon bulb that Phil took, and he very nicely annotated it with all of the various important lines. So this has been a real handy aid in looking at 694 calibration spectra and actually real spectra to line up the features. So that's very nice. And another spectra of note is this one from Regulus. You can see the breaks, these absorption lines, as they line up with the textbook kind of spectrum. So we're starting to get some data, and we're starting to get good results. So we're making progress. We just have a few more steps to go. So that's where we're at.
Cool.
Thanks, Joe. Good job. Good
Awesome.
presentation. Yeah, you're the knowledge man on this. You get too smart, you won't be able to get your t-shirts over your head. All righty.
No problem.
All right, so I think it's time for the program. We've kept Mr. Hunter on the sideline. And Sarah, you want to introduce our guest?
Muted.
You're muted, Sarah.
Hi. So tonight we have Tim Hunter, who's joining us from Tucson, Arizona, to discuss the growing problem of light pollution. So that's light pollution is up there on one of our top two enemies. I think number one would be clouds, but I think light pollution is close second. He's been an amateur astronomer since 1950, and he's the owner of 2 observatories. He's been on the president of the Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association and a member since 1975. He also served on the board of trustees of the Planetary Science Institute. In 1987 is when he founded the International Dark Sky Association, a nonprofit corporation devoted to combating the effects of light pollution. And as Julie mentioned, a lot of you have probably noticed the different sources of light pollution at our observatory. So I'm glad to have him here to teach us more on this topic and how light kind of increased gradually and gradually over time until it's where it's at now, where everyone's kind of disconnected from our skies. So hopefully we can learn some more and get better at protecting our skies at the observatory. So everyone just, like I was doing, have yourself muted so we don't distract them too much. And I'll pass it over to you, Tim.
Thank you very much. Wonderful introduction. I'm really enjoying myself. And it's great to sit here in Tucson and see everybody from, I presume you're all mostly from Fort Wayne, although people could be scattered anywhere. I'm going to try to share my screen. We'll see whether this actually works well. I'll try this one and see what we get. Okay, and now I'm going to try my talk. And you let me know if you can see this or not. All right, very good. So we'll go ahead. Well, I like to call light pollution a theft of the night. But I didn't want to embarrass myself like I've done for so many previous talks. So this is how much I prepared myself. You can see, I wanted to make sure they knew every last thing. Actually, I was taking courses at Swinburne University a number of years ago, writing for a final project. And I actually got in the windowsill in my room and took out pictures of the wide angle lens just to show all this stuff I had spread out. It took me weeks to clean all that up. Well, actually, until I was 8, grew up in Hagerstown. I don't know how many of you know where Hagerstown is. Go down Route 1 a couple hours and you get to Hagerstown, which is halfway between Richmond and Newcastle, a little north of I-70. And I still have friends there and go back a couple of times. I do have Indiana roots, not only Hagerstown, but I also went to DePauw University. This is a fraternity house at DePauw, taken in the early 60s. You don't have winters like this anymore, do you? I just hear about snow right now. This is a winter of 62. But now I live in Arizona, so I don't have to worry about winters. This is where Arizona is.
Do you mind hitting the full screen button?
What was that?
The full screen button, I think it's where your mouse was at the bottom.
Can you see it now?
We see it, it's just not full screen.
Well, he's not in presentation mode. He's in edit mode. You need to,
Okay.
It should be in presentation mode, but let's go ahead and do that.
yeah, that's it. Right.
No, I'm in presentation mode.
Okay.
Hitting me. Are you seeing this over here?
We're seeing
Yeah,
the
we see the
on
tabs
the right, on the left as well.
Now, let me try this again because I have 2 dual monitors and this can be a problem. Let me
Oh.
unshare the screen and then try to share it again and find the proper screen. How about this one? How does that look?
Same.
Hmm.
No,
You're still,
that's better here. Yeah, that's full screen here.
yeah, but you're not in presentation. You're in like the editing mode or something.
No, I'm in the presentation. The problem is I have dual screens and.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
It's large enough that we can see it though. It's fine.
is it gonna be okay for you?
I think so.
We can try one more thing. I don't wanna keep filling with this. Let's just see what screens it offers. Okay, let's try this one. How's that?
That's good. Yeah. I
That
don't-
better?
Stellar.
Huh? Stellar, okay. We'll go ahead here. Just interrupt anytime. Oops, that didn't seem to want to go. Oh, there we go. So here's a picture of my front yard. Here's 2 observatories. This has a 14-inch C14 for visual. This has a C11. Here's a typical Tucson volcano. Actually, that's a forest fire last summer, but it sort of looks like a volcano from this. And it can get, fortunately, these are fairly far away, but they can get really spectacular at night when you see all the things burning. Well, we all here, because we're amateur astronomers, we really think it's fun and exciting. But there are, I think, a couple of big challenges to amateur astronomy. One, you really can't discuss, the lack of young persons entering the hobby. And I'm probably, of all this group, probably one of the oldest, if not the oldest. And of course, light pollution, which we're going to be emphasizing tonight. I love to collect signs that are stupid. And I like this sign. So caution, water and road during rain. This is like a sign saying, all great droughts end with a rainstorm. And there has been a move in the past to actually have space advertising. So I happen to have this Ziggy cartoon. We'll return to our sunset after these brief messages. This is an ongoing real threat. Well, what is light pollution? Well, you pretty much know it's wasted light that gives no function. The main one that bothers amateur astronomers is sky glow, and then glare, which is bright light shining in your eye and causing discomfort. And this hinders you driving, hinders you seeing things. There's also light that goes where it's not supposed to, or light trespass. This is also can be an enormous problem. If your neighbor's light is shut, your light shining your neighbor's window, your neighbor's light is shining your window, or shining into the sky. So I'll, in a couple of minutes, show you why I got involved in trying to found an organization to fight light pollution. We call it the International Dark Sky Association, IDA. Darksky.org is the website. And I really recommend everybody go to this. All kinds of stuff on that site. It's really very well done. And the history of lighting is really quite interesting. I mentioned earlier, and when I first came on, there's a couple of good books, but one book that's definitely worth reading if you can find, called Brilliant, which is the history of lighting. And it really gives a perspective of why people consider lighting so important. It's something we grew up with, had, but if you were growing up 100 years ago, you'd have a different perspective. Street lighting, interestingly enough, began about 300 years ago, and there were oil lamps replaced with wooden poles. And whale oil is very good. So one of the reasons why we decimated the whales for a century or so, because the whale oil is great for burning. And this was eventually replaced by kerosene. By the 1700s and early 1800s, the oil lamps were used, but then now the poles are made of cast iron fixtures. And then in the mid 1800s, you had gas lamps, where you had actually gas, and that a nicer, warmer glow. And then by the 20th century, by about 1900, electric lamps were in widespread uses as street lights. And here's a picture along a beach. Look at this enormous amount of lighting here. And one of the things I find really irritating is all this light, these floodlights that shine on the beach. Well, most people are not going to go into the water on the beach when it's dark out. And if they are, there's plenty of ambient light from over here. If you turn these lights off and tone these lights down, now think about this. You're at a beach and you're looking over the ocean or a big lake. Half the sky is not lit. So you could, even in a big city like Los Angeles, for example, and I was on the Santa Monica Harbor one time. My daughter used to live in Santa Monica, looking over the ocean, and realized if we toned the lights down just a slight bit, we could see the Milky Way over the ocean because half the sky wasn't lit. So it doesn't take very much in some locations to really improve the lighting. We have street lighting, roadway lighting, which I'm not sure quite the difference. Parks are lit up. Of course, we have stadium lighting. Parking lots are obviously important. Landscape lighting can be very nice and beautiful, but can also be extremely obtrusive. That's along with residential lighting. You have buildings that are lit, and then you have pedestrian and bicycle lighting. So there's all kinds of reasons to have lighting, some of which is very useful and some is not. Now, if we look at this picture, of course, we have the lights from the cars, but look at this park right here. These are fixtures that are fully shielded and they shine down. We get very good lighting on the ground, but we can't see the lamps. we get more effective lighting from these than from these, even though there's probably more energy used here and there's probably more glare and wasted light. This is Shanghai. This is, and people do this because this looks gorgeous. And of course, you can't even see a first magnitude star, partially because it's so much light pollution, partially because there's so much haze from the air pollution. However, these lights, a lot of them are turned off at 10 o'clock at night to save energy. So there is some saving grace in that. This is one of my all-time favorite slides. This is a billboard lit. Now, how much light is actually going on this billboard for advertising and how much is going into the sky? Probably 1% of the light's going in the billboard and the rest is going to the sky. So it's just enormous energy waste and glare and distraction. This is another great slide. This slide is actually from the 1960s. And there used to be a lighting engineer, professional lighting engineer by the name of Al Tanner, who sent Ida a whole bunch of slides when we first started in the mid 80s, because he lived in San Francisco and he was disturbed by all the bad lighting, not because of light pollution and the sky, just because of bad lighting and poor design. This is at 1 o'clock in the morning, kind of an industrial area. Over here off the slide is a city park where lights are lit for people to be playing. They're not playing in the park at 1 o'clock in the morning. The light's so bright, so poorly aimed, that hits the photo cell for the street light, turns it off, and here it is shining in this building. Now, what if that was somebody's home or somebody's apartment building, had these lights shining on it 1 o'clock in the morning? Here's the kind of street light that's all too common now. Look at this kind of light. Look at all the glare it produces and how little lighting it actually produces on the ground. This was right next to a restaurant that my wife and I had, right across the side street. And this is Carpet Giant, very nice store in Tucson. And this is a big sign, used to show a giant with carpet. And that because the sign was so big, the wind would blow it out and bust it all the time. And it would be on because of the photo timers. And you'd be sitting there with these big fluorescent bulbs lighting up the sky and no advertising and just wasting energy. And this would be for months like this. And I talked to the owner, I said, "We have that." It says, "Every time I fix it, the wind comes along and breaks it." I said, "Why don't you change the sign then?" "Oh no, I want that sign." This is another stupid thing. This is Pribdike astronomer Phil Anna, University of Virginia. If Virginia they have in the mountains in southwestern Virginia, an observatory. And the university has a rule that all snowy areas, they have to have a roof over entrances right here, but they have to have a light over the entrance too. So here they put the light here and here's the roof. Now, what good is this doing? This is from somewhere in Siberia. Somebody sent this to me. Who knows what this is lighting up? A building, street corner. You can imagine what kind of glare and wasted light this is. This is a great quote. There are two kinds of light, the glow that illumines and the glare that obscures. When I was growing up in high school, we had to read James Thurber, and I come to really love James Thurber. He has tongue-in-cheek stories, and he has a autobiography that's fairly trivial, but I love it, My Life in Hard Times. So one of the talks I occasionally give is My Life in Hard Times, an Amateur Astronomer. So I sort of stole that title. But I came across by accident this quote of his. So here's an example. Somebody wants to light their house up and they want to light their American flag. And so they put the biggest, brightest glare bomb up here that helps to light the flag. But of course, it lights the sky, lights the roof, lights the trees. And of course, it has just nothing but dark shadows down here. So you really can't see anything. You're blinded because it's so bright. You can't hardly see the flag. If you wanted to see your entranceway here, or you wanted to see your driveway or the front entrance there, you couldn't possibly see it. A different type of design, if you put low level lighting and you put it under the eaves and you put it under the eaves by the front door, look at all you can see. And this looks nice, yet the sky is still preserved. So you have the function of being able to see where your path is to the house, where the garage is, and you're not blinded, and the sky is somewhat preserved. This is a mall in Tucson, and this shows what good outdoor lighting looks. So you're looking at the second level, looking down. And these fixtures right here shine the light down. They have a nice even path here. And you can see the light here for the entrance to the store is under the eaves. And there again, you can see the store, but you're not shining all kinds of light up. So outdoor lighting should enhance visibility, not impede it, should not produce glare. It should not be the entirety of the landscape. When you have a bad, ugly light, it takes over the landscaping. You shouldn't have light trespass on other people's property And anytime lighting is put in, there should be a master plan. And typically what happens is when lighting is put at night, somebody just, it's an afterthought. You finish the building, oh, you got to light it up. Somebody doesn't know anything about lighting, just puts a couple of fixtures up there, shines them in some direction, and they're bright and glary. They think that's good enough. Shielding of the light is extremely important. This is a retrofit to a fire station in Tucson. So here's before. And they're actually designed in the 60s to spread the light out as far as possible. The thought being, if you didn't spread the light out and spread it out, it would reduce visibility. And that shielding was bad because here's a shield fixture because it'll limit it down. It turns out that is actually not true. Look how much better compare this to this. You don't have any glare here. You can see this area much better. And you can see that the sky would be much better protected. So you want to have full cutoff shielding wherever possible. Here's just a picture from Calgary. Calgary, a number of years ago, took these street lights and fitted them with these street lights. If we have, this is an old picture, but it's really very good. So we see a drop stage picture. So this is the light we use, maybe for the roadway. You might get a little bit for a sidewalk. Of course, this is going into somebody's house, bedroom window. And this is going across the street into somebody's front yard or bedroom window. And you actually probably should show it going higher up into the sky too. This is really a neat set of pictures here. This is taken at the University of Utah. I spent my entire livelihood at the University of Arizona in an academic environment. And I can speak with authority that some of the biggest blockheads are universities. And because the universities will have a very rigid idea of what to do. And so when the University of Utah many years ago was going to redo its lighting at night for safety, they decided to put in clear globes with bulbs in them. You can imagine the effect of this. And people argued against it, say, well, this isn't going to be very safe. Oh no, it looks nice and it's going to spread the light out. Well, here's an example. So you have this big bright globe here and here. You have these dark shadows here, and you have the pedestrian walking along here. Where's the person? Where'd they go? They're actually standing right underneath the light here. See how decreased visibility? The only saving grace in all this is the campus is a gorgeous campus, it's very wooded. And so an awful lot of the light is blocked by the trees. There's the exact similar type of thing in the same roughly location. Here's a person walking along, innocent pedestrian. And where's he now? Where's the bad guy now? Sitting right here in the light. Actually, when you have dark shadows and you have bright glare, this is actually very good for criminals. They can hide in the shadows. You don't have evenly distributed light. So this is fairly simple, but I mean, pretty much things, you know, unfortunately, these wall packs are very common, even in Tucson. They put up like this, and they shine light everywhere. And of course, they blind you because you look directly at the light bulb. They should be like this. And this is an example I'll show a little bit later of the so-called barnyard type of light, which shines light everywhere. It should be more like this. And I really dislike floodlights because they tend to produce a lot of glare. They tend to be aimed poorly and not directed where they should be. I love this cartoon. Mighty powerful porch light you've got up there. I've got a neighbor who actually is in the hill slightly above us and has a light that he's in the back porch that he shines down, and hardly ever on, but it's very poorly aimed. Shines down our driveway, kind of irritating. There's another example. Here's everybody likes globes. People like globes because they look good during the day. They're not very good at lighting. If they're partially shielded, they're better, and they should be fully shielded. But a globe on the side of a building is ridiculous because most of the light's going up into the sky. Obviously, ought to be shielded and directed down. And the whole issue with billboards nowadays, billboards used to be lit from below because it's easy and cheap to shine it like that. Of course, where's the light go? They should be lit like this. And now we have the issue of electronic billboards, which are LED by small LEDs. And you have extremely bright billboards with constantly changing messages, which not only can produce glare and light pollution, but they can produce tremendous distraction to driving. And it's a very important safety issue. So light pollution, we won't be able to get into this, but it disrupts wildlife. There's a lot of data on that it's not good for wildlife. It could impact human health. I think lighting at night does impact human health, and not particularly positively, but I think it's more indoor lighting than it's outdoor lighting. Light pollution certainly wastes money and energy. it contributes to climate change because you're burning stuff, making CO2 for light that's not effective. And the reason that we're here because it blocks our view of the universe. And that's the reason I got involved in all this. And I love this. Here's something of value before getting it. So we want a dark sky. But when you get a dark sky and you get used to it, no big deal. But then you lose it. You suddenly realize, actually, it's pretty valuable. And when you're when you've lost it, it may be hard to get back. This is Mount Wilson in 1908. This is Los Angeles, obviously a lot smaller. Our exposure, obviously the photographic plates in those days weren't sensitive. You could see how small Los Angeles environment was from Mount Wilson. You can see what it must have been a beautiful, pristine site. One of the things about Mount Wilson, my understanding is the seeing is exquisite up there most of the time. So this, at that time, would probably been one of the best observing sites in the world. It's dark. It's about a 5,000 foot altitude, maybe 6,000 feet, and with pristine seeing. Well, this was in 1985, and you can see how the Los Angeles basin's grown. So you can imagine what it's like up here. Basically, the sky at Mount Wilson on a good night is about the same as having the full moon out. That's about how bright it is. Interestingly enough, the city of Pasadena, which is right here, is, or in the last couple of decades, has retrofitted their lights and they've actually gotten dimmer because they've actually shielded some. But you have the whole LA basin right here, which is a challenge. If you look at Dave Crawford, who was a professional astronomer, a good buddy of mine, co-founder IDA, looked at the effectiveness of large telescopes and then sky glow reduces them. So Kitt Peak, and this has remained steady since studies in the 80s, and actually it's actually going down a little because lighting ordinances. Kitt Peak at over the zenith has about 10% increased lighting. So the sky glow reduces the lighting about 10%. So it's effectively operating the 4-meter telescope at about 88% of its capacity. Palomar, the sky background at the zenith is twice as bright as the natural background. So it's actually only operating at 39% of its capacity. In fact, up here was a telescope that was 39% this area size. We're talking about area size. Lick Observatory, which is in the Southern Bay area, San Francisco area, has got 3 times it. So it's only operating at 23%. And Mount Wilson is 5 times. And so you're actually, you're getting about from Mount Wilson what you would be getting out of about a 20-inch telescope on a dark sky site effectively. And that's for the 100-inch reflector. This is an interesting picture. This is the 4-meter telescope in Kitt Peak right here. This is a several-hour exposure taken many years ago. Here's Polaris, you can see rotation. This sky glow is Phoenix. Phoenix is 120 miles away. I live north of Tucson. I can walk outside and look toward the northwest, and I can see the sky glow easily at Phoenix. In fact, you can go down to the border of Mexico and the United States. We're talking about a 200-mile distance, and usually look up and see both Tucson sky glow and the sky glow of Phoenix. Here's an interesting picture. Dave and I wrote an article against light pollution in Sky and Telescope in 1990. And as an issue, they're citing floodlights against the dome and the 15-inch refractor at Harvard College Observatory. What was the purpose of this? And so here's the sky. You can't see anything there. And this is a few years earlier where they actually could see an aurora. Well, my interest was I own 20 acres of land, about 40 miles direct line of sight southeast of Tucson, about a 60-mile drive. It's called the Grasslands Observatory. And you can see why it's called Grasslands, because it's just grasslands. And I have a 24-inch f5 telescope that was put there in 1987. I've expanded since then. And so my self-serving interest in all this is I wanted to keep my skies dark. I wanted to learn about lighting and what I knew there were some ordinances. And once I started studying this, I became aghast at how bad the lighting was, how poor little thought there was, and how little control there was of it. And it's not something I'm trained in, but it's something I've learned over the years. And I can say, and I said to many people, it wouldn't take me more than a half hour to drive around town with somebody who didn't know anything about this and point out good and bad lights before all of a sudden you realize. And once you realize what's a good light and a bad light, you never can go back. Once you see a bad light, you always recognize it and always disturb you after that. This is what we want. I honestly believe that if we had the right amount of light, only the little things we need to light, shield the lighting, turn it off when it wasn't necessary. If we went to a park in a big city, we should be able to see the Milky Way. Now you step out, you step under a street light, you step in a big urban street, that'd be different, but you have a good sized park, you should be able to see that. This is too often what we're faced with. You know, all these extra fixtures we don't need, most of which are not shielded. They have way too much light coming out of them and they're poorly directed. So we get this enormous sky glow, we get this glare, and of course we have all kinds of light trespass. So why did the problem get out of control? Well, lighting was such a blessing in the early 1900s that there was no long-term vision for nighttime lighting because the dark sky was just taken for granted. It was everywhere, even the big cities in 1900. And there was also a thought, the more light, the better. Lights are often chosen for their daytime appearance. This really irritates me. And I don't know how many of you get the Reflector and are members of the Astronomical League, but I wrote an article in the last issue of the Reflector about my daughter's house, who lives right next to me, in a lot south of me, and they put lights in on their house that are not shielded on the outside. They're not very bright. And they actually didn't meet code. When they had the final inspection of their house, the code person said, well, these lights really aren't up to code. We're going to let you move into the house anyway. Kind of irritated me. Not that I didn't want her to move in the house. And I asked her, why'd you put those things up there? Well, they look good during the day. I said, oh my goodness. The other thing is that like Mount Wilson and Mount Palomar were situated in places because they didn't expect the population to grow as much as it did. So the growth of the population and the light pollution greatly exceeded any expectations. And now we have newer, more efficient lamp types, basically light emission diodes, LEDs. And LEDs will not necessarily produce more light. They're very energy efficient, but not quite as energy efficient as some of the bulbs. But they're very energy efficient and they have the ability, they can be dimmed, they can be easily turned off and remotely controlled, and they last forever. The bulbs that are being replaced don't last forever. So one of the issues is the constant replacement of bulbs. So you would think since we're getting a lot more light or really less money long-term, we could then save money and turn the light down. No, people say, well, let's have even more light because now since these things are more efficient, we can have more light for the same amount of money. This is one of the issues. This is one of the paradoxes in the environmental movement or anything. When you have more efficiency, sometimes you don't reduce your use of stuff and save money. Sometimes you actually increase the use of it because it's cheaper. Very interestingly enough, Flagstaff, which is where Lowell Observatory is located, early on recognized, and Flagstaff is a very small town until recently, that light pollution could be a problem for the observatory. So they prohibited, and this is the 1930s, searchlights. That was the only things. And a gentleman by the name of Merrill Walker, a professional astronomer from about 1965 to 1970, looked at observatory sites in California for newer, bigger telescopes. And he wanted to avoid light pollution. He came up with what's called Walker's Law, which is a long, complicated mathematical formula about how far away from a city you have to be to reduce the light. Basically, he said the best control for light pollution is being away from the city. And it's basically not quite the inverse square rule. In other words, you double the distance, lighting goes down by a factor of 4. Art Hoag is a professional astronomer. I was very fortunate to get to meet Art. He was very well known. In fact, there's an object by Hoag's object. He did all kinds of great work at Tit Peak. And he was the one that got lighting started in Tucson. The Tucson City Ordinance was in 1972 because of Art's thing. And he was a mentor to Dave Crawford, my buddy. And Dave was a very famous photometrist. And Dave was actually the person who developed the 4-meter telescope at Tit Peak. Art went on to Lowell Observatory, became the director. And then when he retired from Lowell Observatory, he came back to Tucson, joined the Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association, became an amateur astronomer. And I got to know him through that. He said, I'm enjoying amateur astronomy so much more than professional astronomy. Lick Observatory in 1977 got a lighting ordinance around the observatory to help preserve it. I don't know how many of you remember Dark Skies for Comet Halley in 1985, the movement that started to try to get the skies darker so we could see Comet Halley better. And that was sort of an influence on me. And then IDA started in 1988. Here's these blasted globes. These look really kind of nice. Here's one on the edge of the campus. Here's a parking lot. Here's the globes. You're driving along, and of course, we don't have misty, rainy nights too often in Tucson, but I'm sure you have plenty of rainy, misty nights in Fort Wayne. And how are you driving along trying to see something with these globes, Brian? If you wanted to come in here and try to read a sign in there to find your way to something. So they look nice during the day, but they're not very effective lighting at night. And you have to add a lot more wattage to the bulbs to get enough light in the ground, because most of it's going up in the sky. Now, I understand that one of your issues is your observatory and you're outside of town. I guess you're east of town is my understanding of it. And there's going to be development next to you. And so one of my recommendations will be to find what people are and get to know them, talk to them, invite them over to your observatory, and make them honorary club members so they buy into the idea to control the lights they're going to be putting out. So here's an example. Let's say we have a nice urban or a suburban or even a farm, and you want to light up the driveway. Just low-level walk lights, really all that you would need. You might be able to put a great big top post light that's aimed down to do it. You might be able to put a smaller one and some lights like this. Too often you do this. This is what you see typically, and this is more common in the East. You put a great big floodlight that on one corner of the parking lot, and you shine it clear across it. And that lights the parking lot up and your job is done. Of course, the light goes everywhere. It blinds you from one direction. It shines in the building over here. And of course, it ruins the sky over here. Or you put a whole bunch of these. So if you're in a situation like this, and you can have lighting, this is the kind of situation you want to try to have and develop. Light pollution, unfortunately, is really increasing at about twice the rate of the population. And I came up with this figure. I don't know where they got this, but this makes sense. About 83% of the global population lives under a light polluted sky. I think you could say for North America, at least Mexico and Canada, that 95% of the population lives in an area where they can't walk out to the Milky Way. And maybe 90% of the population, or 85, have never seen the Milky Way, because younger people, they've never grown up where the skies were darker, or have never bothered to go out of town and see the Milky Way. And I love to show these slides. This is a composite of the Earth at night. You've all seen slides like this. It turns out demographers say these lighting slides, you measure this, are excellent representation of the population. So you'd like to know a population of somebody. So what is the population down in Uruguay? You can make a rough estimate by just looking at the amount of lights. Of course, sometimes that falls because we have North Korea here and we have South Korea. Obviously, you don't want to be like this, but you don't want to be like this either. Now, this is interesting right here. These slides and this right here, these are the squid fleets. And they have these giant glass globes with incredibly bright lights, and they drop on the sea, they float, and the squid are attracted to lights, and they come up and get caught in their nets. This is from the International Space Station. Some of their astronauts love to take pictures of light at night. You can see, obviously, we're Egypt. This is the Nile coming up here and then emptying out into the Mediterranean. You can see where almost everybody in Egypt lives. And if you had an observatory back over here, you'd have fabulous dark skies. It'd probably be clear most of the time because it's dry desert condition. Now, how you'd actually get there is another matter. Here's Italy and the International Space Station. Well, we need lights. You gotta have lights. We do need outdoor lights. One of the issues when IDA started, we realized very soon that we're not going to at all have any effectiveness if we try to say you have to turn off all outdoor lights and ban all lights. It isn't going to work. You need outdoor lights. And there's a situation, right, for a lighthouse, but there are lots of situations where lights are useful and necessary. So there's the three things I like to say. You need light for public safety. In other words, you need to be able to find your way to the car from the parking lot. People feel more secure with some type of lighting around. And, people want to recreate at night, and particularly in Arizona. It's really darn hot during the day. So an awful lot of at nighttime activities, early evening, are done, after hours. So you have lit ball fields and you lit parks for people. But you can control the lights, and the lights can be off at 10 or 11 o'clock at night. So you can have both. So here are some rules about proper nighttime lighting. It's fairly common sense. One of the things that often is not done, you light only the areas that need lighting. Lots of stuff does not need lighting, should never need light. And what I like, and this is something you should work on for your observatory site, you keep dark areas dark. They're dark now, and they have a dark function. You keep them dark. That should be, a absolute. And of course, you should be able to turn the lights off when they're not needed. LEDs offer that. Before the time thing when you had bulb lighting like low pressure sodium, mercury vapor lamps, high pressure sodium, those bulbs couldn't be turned off. They could be turned off, but they couldn't be dimmed, and they're hard to turn back on. LEDs can be controlled. They're being wadded down. They can be controlled remotely, so they have great idea. You can have street lights early in the evening and turn them off later. You can reduce them. You should only use the proper amount of light. There are all kinds of tables of like recommended lighting levels for various functions. And there's a lot lower lighting levels than you would think. And I've been mentioning all through this talk, everything should be shielded. This is really an important point. You should put easy accessible switches and controls in all outdoor lighting. I don't know how many star parties I've been to where there's been an annoying light. Nobody knew where the switch for the light was. There might not be a switch for the light. Nobody knew who the guy was that could turn these lights off. And so he just put up with it. If we get to it, maybe we throw a towel over it or something. There's a light next to the planetarium on the University of Arizona Mall. We've had star parties in the mall, and these big light can't be turned off because nobody knows where the switch. Even the planetarium people don't know where the switch is to the light. Somebody's always going to get with you, facilities management, turn the light off. It never happens. So I think one of the lighting designs is extremely important to put switches in and be able to reach these switches. This is how I felt fighting light pollution. Have any bears in Indiana? There are actually bears in the mountains up here. Never seen one, fortunately. I feel like I'm Toby versus Godzilla. This is an interesting article that was in Newsweek a number of years ago, where people are beginning to recognize that outdoor lighting, excessive lighting, wasn't good. And there's, and I don't have a slide for it, but some of you may recognize that about 5 years ago, there was a cover showing aerial view of Chicago and talking about light pollution in the National Geographic. So there's lots of other groups that are aware of it. One of IDA's goals has been, I think we've unfortunately done a very poor job, is to get the environmental movement to recognize outdoor light, outdoor nighttime, the light pollution. Somehow you'll do all these things, you're going to save the environment, but after dark doesn't really count. So what should we do? Well, it's tough. Obviously learn from our past mistakes. This is very tough. I have these feelings of helplessness periodically, but I get over them. And I think you should realize individuals can make a difference. You know, are we winning the battle of light pollution? No, we're losing it less badly. But if we weren't around, it'd be a lot worse. So what should we do? Should devote resources to the battle. And this is you have a local battle and think about it. I think that we should teach about light pollution in beginning astronomy courses and every star party. That should be something that's sort of subtly getting in it. Shouldn't be a hard-handed. And I think if you have somebody, and at the University of Arizona, there's, you know, in fact, most university degrees, you have to take, if you're not a science major, and of course, most people in amateur astronomy clubs are more science oriented, but a lot of people that are not science oriented, they have to take a science course before they graduate. Astronomy 101, University of Arizona is one of the most popular courses, sort of a non-math science course. It's very well taught and very popular. And somebody that takes Astronomy 101 might be that car dealer, might be the industrial developer next door to you, that they've heard about light pollution and they've got an appreciation for the night sky in their astronomy course. When you wander in 15 years later to talk to them, they may be much more receptive about helping you. This is something I will show in a second. We should set good examples ourselves. If you have a really bad light that's bothering you, pay somebody to take it down. Done that a couple of times. What IDA has been able to do, and this is being done by good lighting manufacturers and good lighting engineers, they're designing and installing much better fixtures. And good lighting ordinances, particularly in places where there are areas that protect, have dark-free, light-free zones. You have light-free zones as part of the ordinance. You can't put any lights there, or minimal lights to just be able to have walk lights, or minimal lights to find your way into a building. Well, you should always pick your battles. So, you know, you're not going to solve all the problems in Fort Wayne. So what you need to do is figure out what is the worst battle you have, what's the most important thing, and go for that and start off small. And maybe nothing more than having a neighbor change their light or just turning their light off at night that bothers your observatory. And then you go on from there. Now, we've all seen these. These are fortunately getting less common. These are the so-called barnyard light, dusk to dawn light, and they spread light everywhere. And the bulb hits down here. This is a Fresnel type of lens. It just strikes lights out. Now, it used to be called a NEMA head fixture. Well, look how the wasted light. This is the useful light. There's a company called Hubble, which is a major manufacturer, put the Hubble sky cap. And these can be bound. They designed that, and there's a NEMA, just like this. Now, The fixture should never have been designed like this, but this helps. Here's an example. Dave Osford, who lived in Iowa at the time, who got involved in the lighting movement earlier on, is now actually does some professional lighting. This is on the street corner. Here's his house here, and this is the street corner. One of these dusted on fixtures. He was irritated. He bought a Huppel Skycap. Well, look how much improvement there is. Look how much better you can see the street, how much less is coming into this yard. Stellafane, a number of years ago, had the proposition that a large federal or a state, excuse me, state prison is being built, has been built next to it, and they're worried about the lighting because obviously you got to light prisons up quite a bit. And Nancy Clanton, a very renowned lighting engineer from Colorado, got the contract for that, and she put in dark sky friendly lighting all through that to preserve, to get good lighting for the penitentiary needs and preserve the skies for Stellafane. So it can be done. So we should always put our money where our mouth is. So here's University Medical Center, Tucson, Arizona. Level 1 trauma center. It's actually the biggest trauma center in New Mexico and Arizona. And here we are, ground mounted sign, dark lit with white lettering, and you can find your way in. So if you're an ambulance and you're being brought into their part of 911, they can find their way to, this is a reflection of my flash, but here you can see. You don't need big, bright, obtrusive things. This is perfectly adequate. My wife and I used to have, and I say I actually had no say in the operation whatsoever. My wife ran the restaurant called the China Rose Restaurant. And I even put the address here because I used to have advertising. She's retired. We sold the property to the next door person who has actually a car repair shop with very good lighting. But okay, so we put lights. So we don't have lights in the building. Well, you can have lights that have a little bit glow. So we had these lights made, low level bulbs, and you had this sort of rose because it's China rose, and you have this glow. You want to light the back door when people go out to take the garbage out at night. In the parking lot, we had full, what they call shoeboxes. We got shoebox fixtures. There again, I want to emphasize, go to the IDA webpage. And I love this quote. If you think you're too small to make a difference, you have never been in bed with a mosquito. How many of you ever had to lay there in bed and there's a mosquito flying around, raise your hand up, try to swat it, and you can't quite get it? I won't go through all this, but IDA just put a statement on their website about responsible lighting. Let's just emphasize a couple of things. Keep sensitive environments should be kept dark. There should be no direct uplighting. Use only the amount of light for the task. And all outdoor lighting should be actively controlled. That means there should be switches. Well, before I finish up here, I want to mention a couple other issues with the night sky, which I find particularly irritating, and it's going to be a real challenge to control. This is a drone, it's an RQ-7, and these are very popular drones for training and also for finding bad guys. Fort Huachuca is about 20 miles direct line of sight from my observatory at Southeast. And they have drones that fly out of there. And I don't know whether they're looking for drug guys, bad guys, or just training. And of course, they fly to the observatory, which is fine. I can sometimes walk out when I'm there and wave to them. I don't know if they're actually looking at me or not. Well, this is what a drone looks like. Here's NGC 2379. I'm taking this great wide angle picture. Here's this drone coming through. So they have a green light on their wing and they have these flashing strobe lights. Here it goes there. These are really, so you could be taking great exposure. These are really hard to get rid of. Here's this. Look at this picture. Here's NGC 3628, M60, M65, and M66. And here's the drone going through because I can tell from the flashlight. This is probably a satellite. This may be a satellite airplane. You know, with Elon Musk and the Starlite satellites, the number of satellites being launched can be enormous problems. Some of these are bright enough to see at the naked eye. They can be, you know, might not be any place in the world where you can see in the middle of Antarctica, where you can see a sky unobstructed by satellites or lighting. This is really very scary. And the effect of professional astronomy is doubly scary. I was just taking a picture with a Crab Nebula the other night. Here's the drone going through. And I can tell it's a drone because I don't know if you can see, well, it doesn't show up here, but here's one of the strobe lights going, another one up there. There's no way you can take that out. So you just got to throw that. Either you live with it, depending on how many pictures you want, or you throw it away and take another picture. Well, I'm getting into my talk, so I always like to say I've done the best I can. So I'll take any questions now. Thanks.
At the beginning of your talk, you mentioned one of the big issues facing amateur astronomy is lack of younger people. Do you think that's probably due to us being disconnected from it basically our whole lives?
Well, I don't know. There's lots of things. I think if you haven't been out, go out and see a dark sky. I mean, I grew up in Indiana, in Illinois, in the 50s and 60s, and the sky was dark. It never even occurred to me it would be a problem. There's actually a street light in the corner. I lived in the corner, and there's a hanging 100-watt bulb, one of these things that would swing in the wind. And I had big old elm trees around. I was more worried about the elm trees blocking my view and the neighbor's house blocking my view than I was about the lights. You know, now I suspect the sky, this is in a suburban Chicago area, I suspect the sky is a lot brighter, and those, unfortunately, those elm trees, the Dutch elm trees are long gone for the Dutch elm disease. So I think that's part of it. And I not to belabor the point, I had James McGahey, who helped share the observatory with me, and I went to Germany about 20 years ago, and his wife had a cousin, Beta was her name, 16-year-old at that time, and she spoke very good English. And James and I were talking about astronomy. She thought it was the most boring, stupid study in the world. Next summer, she happened to come to Arizona to visit. And so we decided to drive down to the observatory. It's in July, which is normally a rainy, stormy season. And on the way back, there's an observing site the local club has, a big 170,000 acre ranch called the Empire Ranch, which is now owned by the BLM. And so we go drive in there, and there's a couple of telescopes set up. Now, to be clear, this is mid-July. And she gets out of the car, and the summer Milky Way is overhead at 5,000 feet with no light pollution. It was just stunning, absolutely stunning. She couldn't believe it. She'd never seen it like that. She said, what's that? What is that? I mean, just couldn't. And the Zodiacal light was there, and there were people with telescopes. We couldn't get her back in the car. She didn't want to leave, and we were getting tired and wanted to go home. And she said, now I understand. And I thought, if we could take every young person, every person that wants to put up bad lights and drag them out to someplace like that, they would understand. But that's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Tim, I got a question for you. I live about 20 miles south of Fort Wayne, and I'm into imaging quite a bit. And I know there's a number of sources on the internet to get information like this, but I guess as of today, what is the best location, the best source for me to find out what at my location here, what my limiting magnitude is? What is the level of brightness at my location? Where can I get that information specifically?
There is, and I would have it, there is a website put out by Italian Zibano et al., and also one from Germany that puts out an all sky map all over the world. Will have contour maps showing roughly what the limiting sky magnitude. The best bet, though, is to buy one of these unihedron sky meters and go out and take your own measurements. And they're not that expensive. Yeah, are you familiar with what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I've heard them. I'm trying to avoid. That's why I was wondering if there was current data available that I could look
There
up.
is, and it's probably on the IDA website. I can't give you the exact URL, but it probably, because there are maps that will show zones, and these zones can be then roughly correlated with limiting magnitude. The other thing is there are a number of charts around that you can find for visual things that'll show the magnitude of stars, how many stars you can see in a given area. Will tell you also your visual limiting magnitude.
Yeah, that was the problem. I found actually so many sources, and some of it was using outdated data, or it wasn't accurate, needed updating. And I figured, well, if anybody would know, it would be you. And I was just kind of hoping if you could point us to a URL where I could, zoom in and say, okay, here I am, and here's what my pollution looks like.
Well, there are URLs that should be on the IDA website, and there are all sky maps all Earth maps that are done with this, either by Cezanne or one out of Germany. And what they're doing is using latest satellite imaging to look down on them. They're very detailed. So you can see the lights and they should translate into limiting magnitude. But to be honest, my experience has been the best experience is to actually measure it.
Yeah, like I said, I don't have, what about using DSLRs and things like that? I know some amateurs do use their CMOS or CCD cameras and.
You can do, and I actually did a photometry project, was a nightmare because I really didn't know what I was doing, to be honest. But you can take pictures of an area that's going to be overhead, and you can use the Cousin Johnson's filters, for example, and get and then you can go to a Landolt standard field and do same type of things, and then translate that. And that will give you your sky background as part of that measurement. And you'll get like a really good sky, really very dark sky. You know, a dark sky that would be observatory, world-class observatory would be 22nd magnitude per arc second, per square arc second. Grasslands may be 21.4 depending on the given night. The typical mine out here in Tucson, I can probably look up overhead on a good night with somewhat aging eyes, see maybe a direct vision 5.5 magnitude. So mine is about 19.6, which is urban. So you would probably be, for 20 miles south, you probably would have maybe overhead and away from the sky below 6 magnitude visual. Magnitude, I'm just guessing.
Does your site contain information on where to go so that we could learn how to make these measurements?
It should be on the IDA website, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And if not, then there are some people you can, Sarah has my email address. You can just write me directly. I can give you a couple of names at IDA you can write to and say, I'd like to get a lot more about how using a light meter, how to do a dark sky meter.
Well, yeah, I was thinking specific more of using like a DSLR or a CMOS, dedicated astro imaging camera to actually make some measurements and then come up with some kind of correlation and go from there.
If you look at the Bortle sky classification, you can determine what Bortle Plashers is. That will also pretty much correlate to limiting magnitude.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Tim, this is Julie, the president. We are in the Jefferson Township Park here, which is kind of east of New Haven, where I live, which is just like on the outskirts of Fort Wayne. And what is the best tactic to approach? Do we go to the mayor of New Haven? Do we go to the planning commission? I made an attempt to see the mayor, my phone, and they wouldn't connect me because unfortunately our mayor is into real estate, and I'm afraid that he's in cahoots with the guy that bought the park next to us. On the other side of the fence, it was a military place, and it's been bought by a developer.
Well, if you want to do an ordinance, typically you go to zoning and planning first.
Well, I'd be satisfied with maybe just getting them to consider lighting.
Yeah, I think the best bet is to find out who owns that and to go talk to them and invite them to your observatory and say, look, we're not against any kind of development here. Obviously, we prefer to have it just pristine and dark, but that's not going to be. So what we want to have you do is enjoy your economic benefits where you have, but you can put in lights that won't bother us very much. We can all be happy. And so I would reach out, try to find out who the owner is. If you can go seek them or somebody in that representative.
Yeah, there's
have them come out. Of course, this is all a problem with COVID because you can't do this as easily. And come out to see your site, even give them free club membership. And that's the way you start the thing on a personal level. Well, it's much easier than
on the bulletin board or the development sign out there. I could try calling at least one of the names I've heard of, but whether they'll see us or not, I don't know.
And then you might at the same time in parallel go to zoning and planning for the city and say, because that's way most ordinances start, and just go talk to them and say, we really like to control the lights and here's what I want to do. I don't want to stop development. We want to have good lights go in, and when lights have to come down to be changed out, we want to have good lights going for bad lights. And maybe have some type of grandfathering for real bad stuff so that eventually it gets changed.
Yeah, because you
Yeah,
got the
approach it
city
like
and
that.
then you got the Allen County.
Pardon?
There's a city in the Allen County when you.
Right, and each one will have a different, they'll have the zoning, they may have a different term in that, but basically it's the way you go. And then you may have, like in Tucson or with the county, I would go to the person that represents the particular ward that I'm in. I live in the county, I don't live in the city. And talk to them, just meet and greet kind of thing. They're not going to, you can say, I'm interested, and then they will then refer you back to zoning and planning. But you made, and so the zoning and planning, and you've worked with them, and it takes quite a bit of work, but once you get them, if they buy into it, generally the council, the city council, the county commissioners, whatever they are, will generally buy that. The zoning and planning people say, we want this ordinance, we think it's good, we think it's the way to control stuff, and we've vetted it, then generally we'll get it passed.
Okay, thank you.
Tim, is there any economic arguments you can make? I mean, that'd be the easiest thing to impress people with if you could come close as far as their actual electric bill and installation costs versus payoffs, whatever. Like, I didn't know how close the equation, and of course it'd be site specific depending on the installation or whatever like that, and I didn't know if you've run across any data like that. By the way, the previous question there, that Unihedron sky quality mirror, that's on that's for sale for $135 with the lens, $135. So I was thinking of getting one of those, kind of a cheap way to go, because then we can point, because we have a brighter sky looking toward the city and a darker sky out there. I'm kind of curious what the magnitude difference is.
Yeah, those things are, I have the first model, and they're wonderful. The later one's even better. They're a little bit careful. You've got to, if you're pointing to the Milky Way, you're actually getting it brighter than not. And, and you can have a cloud that comes by. So there's provisos, but definitely worth having. They're not that expensive.
Tim, does anybody sell aftermarket sort of cutoff shields that you could put on street lighting or other outside lighting to help control the stray light?
Yes, there are. As I say, the Hubble SkyCap, but there are a list of lighting manufacturers on the IDA website that produce good lights. One of the things that really appalled me, I have to admit, that my daughter and son-in-law want to put in a post where their mailbox is, and they want to put a light on top of it. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go, and it's going to be a low watt light. And I said, well, it's got to, be shielded and all that kind of business. And so I went on and looked for dark sky friendly lighting. That it says dark sky friendly lighting, and it's amazing how much crummy lighting was there. Somehow I don't know where they got the term dark sky friendly lighting. So you have to be very careful about what you get. You go on the IDA website and you can go to the various manufacturers and see what's there. That'd be the best bet to start off. The basic principle is you shouldn't be able to see the light. In other words, you shouldn't be able to see the bulb correctly, and the light should all be shielded and shine down. And the lighting levels should be appropriate. Now, that may be hard to understand when you first get started.
Well, my street lights glare right in my eyes as I'm driving, so I know I'm seeing the bulb. I'd like to.
Yeah,
I'd like to keep them out of my backyard, but I either put up a tarp over them or find something that's a little bit better.
Well, one of the things that has irritated me and for years, somebody's decision, they want a street light put in an alley, for example, overrides the decisions for the other 4 or 5 neighbors that don't want the light shining into the yards. And once something goes up, once a bad light goes up, it's very difficult to take down.
Right.
So what you want to do, for example, you definitely want to talk with the people that are going to be on the property next to your observatory site, because once they put up bad stuff, it won't come down. So you want to stop it from going up. Absolutely.
Right.
And you want to have switches on it. If you get to know them really well and you're out the observatory after hours, let's say 10 o'clock at night, where they're probably not going to be busy, and they trust you, then they may be some place where one of you would be allowed to go and turn some of their lights on. There's all kinds of ways it can work. It just depends who you're dealing with.
Tim, could you speak a minute about, you spoke quite a bit about the layout of lights and how these should be structured, but what about filters, or which colors of light would you think would be best to cut down light pollution?
Yeah, I avoided that topic because it's kind of complicated. A lot about it. But by
Sorry
and
about that.
large, the fact that city ordinances are going into it, basically you want what's called color corrected lighting. For this, we're talking about street lights or big lights. You want what they call warm lighting and lower temperature lighting. So you want lighting that's under about 3,000 Kelvin or like 2,500 Kelvin. With this is, and these are all LEDs because all the lights that are going to go in nowadays are going to be LED lighting. And this is controlled by the LED design. And these will give they'll be kind of white, a little bit of an orange glow to them if you look at them. That's the kind of light. You don't want high temperature like 5,500 ones that were put in. Not only do they produce glare, but the bluish light scatters a lot more. And it's much more disruptive as far as the night sky is. And actually turns out to be much more disruptive toward wildlife. So on the slide that I didn't talk about, but there were some IDA statements about what type of color temperature you want. There are some pretty good, I haven't actually used them, but I've had friends reported some pretty good light pollution filters that are being sold for light, that where you can, for particularly these work pretty much for, they don't work very well for galaxies or reflection nebula, but they're pretty much for emission nebula, high H2 regions. There's some pretty good light pollution filters you can buy for amateur astronomy astrophotography, so you can actually do even light polluted skies, some pretty good emission nebula imaging, which is sort of a different issue because it gets out most of the light that bothers it unless the hydrogen alpha through.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe we can approach the, what is it, the tractor club that's in our park too? Because I just remember one night I was out there and they had like the floodlights blasting and it was like 10 or 10:30 at night. And it was made things really hard to see.
Sarah, we can turn out the light on the side of their building. They mounted a switch out there for us.
Oh.
The only time they have the floodlights on is if they're working, getting ready for the tractor pull the next day or something, I think.
Oh, okay.
Might have been a bad night you're out there.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is they do things on Saturday night too. So they're out there 3-4 times a year, plus the other times they're out there messing around mowing and doing other stuff like that. So they're usually out about the same hours we are, which they turn on the other lights, which is part of that parking thing in the front there. So I may get back to the eventual fencing thing, whatever like that in the future.
Mm-hmm.
There again, you might go look at the lights they have and there might be ways to replace them, even though they want to work. And you might be, I'd have to look at the situation and just offer to replace their lights for your cost, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done that in a couple of situations. I've got the advantage here because there's lots of very good lighting engineers here. I didn't mention them, but there's an organization called International, or the Illuminating Engineering Society in North America. These are professional lighting engineers. Dave Crawford, very early on, joined them before he and I ever met up. He wanted to learn about lighting. And these are the kind of people that design large lighting installations. They're very aware of dark sky. They're very well, even illumination, and they're very aware well of not producing light trash blast or light pollution. So you get somebody like that, and there probably is somebody that in the Fort Wayne area that does that. You get somebody like that, and they can walk out there and look at the light, and they say, oh yeah, we can replace this with this kind of fixture over here. And of course, they allowed you to put a switch in, so that's part of the battle. And one of the ways, the ballparks around here are real irritation, and some of them are very poorly designed. The newer ones going in are fine. But one of the ways that the observer, and we can argue the economic advantage of the observatories in Arizona, and astronomy is big business, and it really is multi-billion-dollar business. And so, people respect that more. But all outdoor lighting of the ballpark type has to be off by 10 o'clock at night or within an hour of the event ending. So presumably you don't have these things where it's 2 o'clock in the morning and you still got these lights living up all over the place. So that helps quite a bit.
Hey, Sarah,
Yeah.
read the chat from Al. He doesn't have audio, but he had the same problem.
Okay. He said, I had a case against my neighbors who put up a street light on my observatory. I won the case after the negotiations didn't work. So.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar. I think I actually met Al. I think he has come to the Tucson Gem and Mineral Show. I think he's not Al. Well, he doesn't have a mic. I don't know. Maybe he can respond in chat. I think we may have met many years ago. You may have even been at my wife's restaurant. Sound very familiar. Was that a case that was discussed in Astronomy Magazine at one time?
I don't know, maybe he'll put something else in the chat.
Hopefully you can run the chat. One of my real good friends is Dan Canals, an amateur astronomer. Dan was the U.S. Attorney for Southern Arizona, an acting U.S. Attorney for Arizona one time, retired. And so many years ago, he began to look at, this is before ordinances came in, about the laws about suing somebody had a bad light. Turns out it's very difficult to actually win those cases. And there are a couple of famous cases from 1920s where a sports park went up that shined their lights on an outdoor drive-in theater. In the theater, of course, with the light shining on their screen, people couldn't see the movie at night, and they sued them. They lost. It's not too bad. It's just the way it goes. That's what the court said. So, and we have tried a number of times in the past to get the EPA to rule on light pollution. That's a pollutant. There should be outdoor regulation. They said, no, it's not in the original enabling legislation. Therefore, we can't consider it, which I think is kind of silly. So one of the things that hasn't been pursued, but ought to be pursued, and this is one of the things, if you have more resources, to get an ANSI standard on lighting and produce a standard for outdoor lighting. And so that you have to meet the standard, particularly if you're doing big projects. And one of that would be the lighting levels, the direction of the lighting, switches to turn the lighting off, switches to reduce the lighting, and so forth.
Have you ever contacted like National Science Foundation? They would have a lot of clout, wouldn't they, Tim?
We contacted the EPA directly a number of times, and one of the persons that was very interested in helping us was Gabrielle Giffords, the congresswoman that got shot here 10 years ago now. I remember that in Tucson, because she grew up in this area. She would come to amateur astronomy meetings as state representative. I'm not sure if she was an amateur astronomer per se. I don't know many heard of Bob Jen, who recently passed away, but a wonderful amateur astronomer, lived in Tucson. Bob was very big in the astronomy league. A very good friend of Gabrielle Giffords. And so we were working with Gabby Giffords, or Bob was, to try to get some federal legislation. And then when she got shot and got injured and other things changed, it hasn't gone anywhere. So they were going to try to circle back and go back at that. Legislation and lighting ordinances help tremendously, but they have to be enforced. And it's much better to get people's cooperation and willingness to do it rather than try to bludgeon them with the law. And I've gotten some irritating lights. The neighborhood around here they're hardly ever on, so it's no big deal. But around my observer, there's a couple of neighbors, and they're a fair distance. Amazing how far these lights can travel. I basically call them up. They kind of get irritated, but they turn them off. Now I do have, if I had to, and I don't really want to go this route, there are lighting ordinances in all of Southern Arizona, so I could file a formal complaint and and perhaps get something done. But that generally gets to be very hostile. If you have a very valuable resource you want to protect, you may have to do that. But I think that's the furthest step you want to go on doing these things. The best step is to meet these people and to get at them before they put up bad lights. And what I've done with the neighbors around me in the remote location is to invite them over to the observatory, and a few have come over there and generally fairly cooperative, and there's enough distance. But a bad light can go a long ways. It doesn't really hurt astrophotography because most of the time the building shields a telescope, or you've got shrouds around the telescopes, but it's kind of irritating. You want to sit out and look at meteors, and you got this bright light shining in your eyes from a quarter mile away, even though it's, the whole sky is fairly dark. You have to move around to put some kind of obstruction between you and the light, or talk to a person to turn it off. And amazingly enough, a lot of lights are put in homes, but there's no switches, outdoor lights. They don't put any switches on these things. They come on at night and they go off during the day, and they just put them on there. No way to turn them off unless you unscrew the photocell. So there's a lot of work to be done, as you can see.
Yeah. I have one in mind I'm gonna go unscrew after this. It's like connected to the garage and it shines like right in the bedroom at night. And it was just on the house when we moved in and haven't fixed it yet. But
You can fight light pollution. You take a battle, you can win. Just unscrew the bulb or turn it off.
yeah, it's so crazy to think that, like, unlike other forms of light pollution, like literally all you have to do is flip a switch in theory to like set it back to how it was, but it would take like everyone to do it.
Well, you just made a good point. I used to say sometime, light pollution is the simplest form of pollution to solve. The problem, the cause is obvious, and the solution is very simple. Turn the lights off. Now, that may not be doable in large case. So if we can't solve light pollution, do you think we're going to be able to clean up the air and the rivers and the carbon dioxide? Much more complicated problems, much more challenging. So, and light pollution ought to be part of it. And one of the things we did at IDA is to be very honest. In other words, you have your facts, you don't exaggerate and claim this is the worst problem in the world, that we're all going to suffer and wither away if we don't solve it. But you basically present the facts to people and try to offer them solutions. Because almost any situation, the sky glow is a problem. So if you got a 1 million+ city next to you, you're gonna have bad sky glow, even if the city does a pretty good job with it. But certainly local neighbors, you can control those lights by working with them. Now, it may take a lot of effort and we may have some really obstinate people, but it's a general rule. With enough effort, you can get those controlled. And areas that are dark, and like your observatory site, you might try to find where there's special protection you can get involved for that. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe we can have our new neighbors over one night and have them look through the scopes too, so they can see like why we want to preserve the night sky.
Well, I think when the COVID thing gets done, you should definitely invite the council or the mayor or wherever the area. So you're in a suburb. That's part of a suburban area. It's not actually in Fort Wayne per se. Who's the controlling authority for your observatory? Is that the county or is that a community?
It's the county.
County. Invite the county commissioners out. And then subtly ask about any ways we can keep some control on this and keep our site dark, and what can we do, et cetera, et cetera. The COVID really throws a big bollocks in these things, because people love to come to star parties. And you can amazing how much you can gain from that.
Julie, we'll have to get you elected on New Haven City Council. And you might as well go for the job of city planning. That's where maybe some action would happen.
Tim, I don't know if you know or gotten involved with this, the structures of county, when you talk about county commissioners, I don't know if they're like the cities where they have to have a safety director. Who is the person who would put the boot down and get into the liability issues? Oh, we can't do whatever like that. We'd have potential liability if somebody misses something and drives into something or blah, blah, blah. So I don't know if county commissioners, they run that by a lawyer.
Well, there would be they have the county attorney is more for the prosecutor, but they have a attorney that would represent the county for legal matters. But my response is that this is nonsense, because there's plenty of communities, hundreds of communities that already have these kind of ordinances in, and that so there's no requirement that you have to have that. In fact, there are lots of legal things that would say you're fine if it was all dark and somebody runs into it. You're less likely to be sued than if you put a light up, because now they say the light either blinded them or the light wasn't sufficient. So they're actually a good law to say that you're better off just ignoring the problem than actually putting something up.
Yep.
How much longer? 15 minutes?
Yeah.
15, 20? Matt?
15 probably. My wife's saying I'm having a ball. So anytime you guys want me to go, I'll take off. But and I when I first started this, I went up to Traverse City, Michigan. We have a very good buddy there, Jerry Dobeck, who's a very prominent amateur astronomer. And they were trying to get ordinances in there. And one of the things in those days, you're trying to sell shielded fixtures. And the lighting engineers, or not the lighting engineer, but the lighting people up there said, oh, we can't get those, so we can't put those in. I said, well, I just happen to have a list of a whole bunch of suppliers in Tucson. We have no problem shipping the lights to you in Traverse City. So if you want to order from these people, you can do it. So I was very prepared because I knew that was going to come up. So we can do this in Tucson. Why can't you do it in Traverse City? You know, we can have these rules in Tucson. We can buy these lights, and I have people that'll sell them to you, and they have no problem shipping them to you. Well, the local people, you know, picked up on that real quick. So, well, we can go ahead and do it. They just didn't want to. A lot of this is they don't want to, and it's just an excuse. But it's not, you know, but it's going to be tough to overcome. I'm not saying this is, you know, that you can't overcome it. I'm not saying that, you know, this is not true, but yeah, you may, you know, sometimes you just don't win. Sometimes zero, Dave, you say it's binary, 0, 0, 0 for a long time. All of a sudden, one day it flips over. All of a sudden, one day somebody's your opponent. All of a sudden comes around to your point of view. And then you've got, so you always want to make allies, not enemies. Even the people that you consider the most evil light pollution people in the world, you still want to be in friendly terms with them.
Would you say the biggest source of pushback for you is people are just sort of apathetic towards the problem? Like,
Yeah,
people
I think so.
just don't
And
care.
it's the biggest source, I think, and this affects me, is the problem is so large and it's so out of control. Why bother? I can't do anything about it. That's the biggest problem. So that's why I want to start small, and that's why if you have an area that's dark now, you want to take plans to keep it dark. You can't prevent growth of a city, but you could certainly prevent some growth around you, or you can certainly prevent bad lights right next to you. The other thing that years ago when I was a club president, we wanted to get an observatory site. And I sort of had the idea, we weren't going to get the site, we're going to buy our own property, and we're not going to get a site given to us by the county or the state. Of course, they weren't exactly going to give us anything anyway. The reason being is I'd heard about the Milwaukee Astronomical Society had a beautiful site that was like given to them in the 20s or 30s in a suburban area of Milwaukee. And as the city grew out, the site deteriorated, but they couldn't do anything about it because they didn't own the land. I said, well, if we have a site that deteriorates, you own the land, you sell it, and you move on. And the Orange County astronomers have a wonderful site, 22 acres. And they originally, many years before, had 5-acre sites near Palm Springs. And of course, that deteriorated, but the land was worth a bundle when they sold it. And so that sort of, and I've had nightmares at various times about my observatory site down in Sonoyta, Arizona, Sonoyta, Elgin area, about a park is, you know, an industrial thing is U-shaped around it. I have these, you know, nightmares, like I can't find the exam room when I hadn't gone to the course all semester long, one of these kind of dreams. Then I wake up and say, well, at least if that happened, at least the land would be worth a lot. I could sell it and move on. But, you know, at some point or other, that gets to be a real hassle, obviously. So there's all kinds of considerations in this.
One of the areas, Tim, that's getting brighter near us at the observatory is along US 30, which is a number of miles away from us, but it's getting heavily developed along there. There's like a couple truck stops that are just lit up like Yankee Field, you know. And there are those high lights that spread light everywhere. I don't know what you could ever do with those kind of that kind of development, unless, like you say, you got into it before they put the light poles up.
Yeah, I guess it's tough. Once they're up, there's an interesting situation in southeast Arizona. They're not too far from Mount Graham Observatory, which is, you know, world-class observatory. Got Vatican Observatory, University Observatory on there. And there's a truck stop called Robert Griffin. It's a big chain of truck stops. I'm not sure they're in your area. I think they're more in the southeast and the southwest. And they'd been there a while and had really horrendous lights they put in. They're in a county ordinance. They're against the ordinance. They just sort of said, too bad. We're a big important truck stop and we don't really care. And then a buddy of mine, this is before Ida formed, was always he lived in the area trying to get them to change. And the county, you know, said, well, you know, they're not there, but we're not going to do much to enforce it, et cetera, et cetera. Then they wanted to expand And then he went to the planning and zoning and they put a halt to their expansion. Said, no, you can't be zoned to have this extra parking lot. You can't have this over here until you correct all your lights and stop them cold. And they did. So that's one of the issues. And so we could probably find truck stops in Arizona that have reasonably good lighting for a truck stop. I mean, it's still going to be bright, but at least aimed down and good. And you use those as examples. So if you know someone's going to go in somewhere on Route 30, and you might go ahead and say, we'd like to have these lights and we'd like to have this control because we're going to see it, 20 miles away. And here's an example of a place that's done very good. It's good lighting. It's safe for their customers. They can see their pumps. People can come in to have their meals, but it won't bother us as much. And that would be a way to go in to do it. But once it's up, it's going to be very tough.
All right. Anything else before we, it's 10 after 9. We don't want to get Tim in trouble.
No, I don't. I was going to be like a friend of mine when he has a Zoom meetings with his family, he has a Brandy Manhattan. I thought, well, that probably won't go over too well if I'm trying to give a talk.
Any other questions for Tim? I guess not. So I think it's time we shut down the meeting and let Tim go make his wife happy.
Great. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. Really
Thank you so
enjoyed it.
much, Tim, for your information. And your show.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome
Hope
program.
to be there and visit you someday because I do go back to Indiana periodically.
Please do. All righty.
Good night.
Night.
Good night, everybody.
Night. Great program.
Yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Right.